Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography Review with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to be specifically looking at and focusing on the different migration waves to the United States. And what we're going to do here is we're going to relate it specifically back to things like push factors and pull factors, and talked about the different types of push factors and pull factors that were part of those migration waves. So we're going to kind of be reviewing both of those concepts. So when we look at this particular concept, first of all, let's do just a brief overview. I've seen it in a couple of different sources. Some sources have it as 4 different waves of migration to the United States. Other sources have it as 3 waves or 3 periods of migration to the United States. So I'm just going to break it down into 3. I believe that's what Rubenstein does. So I'm just going to go along with that. Just be aware of that. Some sources do it in 4, some do it in 3. Anyway, when we talk about these different waves, what we're referring to is not necessarily just everyone that's coming to the United States during these particular periods, but the main groups of people that are coming in terms of the largest numbers, and I guess are going to have the greatest amount of, maybe the most significant impact on the United States, our population, the cultural landscape, those types of things. So you can see we break it down into, or what it is broken down into, 3 different periods of colonial era. Roughly 1500 or so, when the age of exploration begins with the Europeans, and then up into the 1770s, the 19th century, including pretty much most of the 1800s, and then you have kind of the late 20th century. So anyway, this right here is a good chart. I think it comes from the Population Reference Bureau. You'll notice that they actually break it down into 4 periods, and that's one of the sources that I was talking about. And you can see, you can look at this graphic, look at the different places they're talking about, and they have some good resources, some good articles that you can go back and read if you would like, when it comes to looking at migration to the United States. So the first one we'll look at is the colonial era, and clearly there's an issue here with my graphic, and it wasn't like that as far as I remember. I apologize for that. Let's go ahead and fix that. There we go. All right, nice. Okay, so anyhow, when we look at the colonial era up to the 1770s, the main source of immigrants coming to the United States, North America, are going to be Western Europe and also Western Africa. If we look at the Western Europeans, primarily the English, the Spanish, and the French, and the reason I have immigrants here in quotation marks is because really they're not immigrants to the United States at this point. They're just simply, I guess maybe you could say, they're migrating from their native country to colonize or populate the colonies and the continent, so certainly not the United States at this particular juncture. So if we look at the Western Europeans, one of the most important elements to notice is that it is a voluntary migration. You have really all the push factors and pull factors at play here. They're both cultural and economic pull factors. Not so much environmental, but definitely the cultural and economic factors. And we can look at those as both push and pull factors. So if we look at England, you definitely had the cultural push factor, looking at political and religious, as well as those being pull factors. Because if we think about the English coming over, some of them coming for political freedom, some coming for religious freedom, some coming to start new lives, some coming to kind of seek their fortunes. And so those would be considered, if you think about political persecution, religious persecution, those would be considered economic push factors as well as pull factors, because they're seeking freedom in that particular instance. And then the economic pull factor, because of those who maybe are seeking to make money. You think specifically about the Virginia colony and the potential for gold and things along those lines. At least they thought they were going to get gold, ended up not getting any gold. But anyhow, if we look at the Spanish, primarily economic and cultural pull factors. The economic pull factor, if you think about the conquistadors coming to the New World to achieve the 3 objectives, the 3 G's that we talk about: God, gold, and glory. God, obviously, the expansion of the Catholic Church. Gold, looking for the gold in the New World, and glory for themselves, but kind of an official line, glory for the Spanish Empire. So obviously the economic pull for the gold, and then the cultural pull looking for the expansion of the Spanish Empire, as well as the expansion of the Catholic Church. And you look at the French, Primarily an economic pool, because the French are primarily sending people out so that they can be a part of the fur trade and trading those natural resources. So that's going to impact the French in several ways, not only their interactions with the natives, but also with the number of people that they send and where they send them to in North America. And then the West Africans who are coming to the United States, primarily as a part of the slave trade, so obviously that would be considered an involuntary movement. Now, when we look at this, primarily you think cultural and economic push factors, the people that are in Africa selling the African slaves to the Europeans, and then also the cultural, because the cultural push factor because of the cultural climate, the political elements that are you actually have. I guess you could tie them up kind of together. Economic, because they're being captured and sent to the New World exchange for money, plus the cultural element that is going to allow for the capturing and the enslavement of them and selling of them to the Europeans to be sold into slavery and then brought to the New World. The late 19th century, one of the more important events that's going on during this particular period is going to be the Industrial Revolution. Main source of immigrants again is going to be primarily Europe, but this time in Europe we're looking not just at Western Europe but also Southern and Eastern Europe. And industrialization is what's taking place during this particular period. So with industrialization, also coupled with the second agricultural revolution, you're going to have population growth. And then with that population growth, you're going to have the strain on the resources, whether we're talking about economic resources, land resources, or food resources. And so that's going to put those restrictions on people, and so that's what's going to entice them to move to the United States to go to a place looking for more abundant resources, but also going to look for new opportunities as a result of the lack of resources that are available in their country. In Western Europe, the primary countries to look at are Ireland, and you could look at both an economic push and pull factor. The economic push factor, you could look at the Irish potato famine that took place in that country, leaving a lot of Irish not only hungry but also destitute, couldn't afford to pay their land rent to the landowner, typically the British landowner, because most of them were tenant farmers, and so a lot of them went. That was the economic push factor, and then that's ended up going to also pull them to the United States, looking for new job opportunities. Now, I guess maybe you could say environmental push factor here as well, because of what happens and what causes the potato famine in the first place. In Germany, a similar event going on. You have industrialization taking place. Population is growing, causing that economic push and pull factor, pushing people out and then encouraging them to come to the United States to seek new opportunities. But also a cultural push factor because of some religious persecution that was taking place in Germany at the time. And then in Southern and Eastern Europe, the main countries or the main kingdoms countries we're going to consist of are Italy, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. And so similar situation, just like the others, industrialization is taking place, population is growing, creating it kind of at the same time working in tandem, an economic push and pull factor, pushing them out because of population growth, pulling them to the United States to look for new jobs and new opportunities. Plus they had been hearing from people who had already moved, and so that's going to entice them to come as well. The late 20th century, if we look at our main source of immigrants, we're going to be looking at Asia and Latin America. In Asia, we're looking at both economic pull factors and then also cultural push factors. Economic pull factors because of new opportunities that there might be available for people from Asia in the United States during the latter part of the 20th century. Plus you had a lot of wars and you had a lot of communist conflicts in several Asian countries, causing a lot of them to move to the United States. You had the Communist Revolution in China, you had the Communist Revolution in Korea, in Vietnam, okay, encouraging a lot of people to come to the United States. So economic pull factors looking for new opportunities in the United States, but also those cultural push factors where you had a lot of the communist revolutions and overthrows causing people to end up moving to the United States. And then in Latin America, very similar situation to the countries we've already looked at. Economic push and pull factor, when you had improvements with the Green Revolution, you had improvements in food supply, you have the movement of industrialization to Latin America, improvements in life expectancy and things like that, population begins to grow. There are fewer resources. You have the economic push factor as well as the pull factor to the United States, where the job opportunities are available, as well as in some instances, especially recently, some cultural push factors that are going to revolve around the drug cartels and the violence that are in some Central American countries. And we've seen that within the last couple of years. What was it, just last year, where we had this large surge of young children coming to the United States. And of course, that would be part of the illegal migration, but you still have that, people trying, because of oppressive governments, because of issues with the drug cartels and violence, creating a push factor for people to come to the United States. Some things to also consider there that are wrapped up in this would also be things like American migration policies. If you look over the years, essentially you could wrap it up into three broad categories. Initially, there was no real policy on immigrants. Then we went to qualitative policies, basically saying only certain types of people were welcome. Now, for the most part, we allowed people in, but we just said only a certain amount of everyone could come in. And now we've moved pretty much strictly to quantitative policy, saying that we're only going to take so many people, is in a large, not in a large number, but we're only going to take so many people from all across the world. So it doesn't really matter where you are from. We're only going to take a certain number from across the world. So you have to consider that when you're looking at the different types of people that are moving to the United States, the type of people that would be considered eligible to come to the United States over the years. And then, of course, also related to this is Zelinsky's model of migration transition, thinking about the relationship between who's coming to the United States and their level of development. Because as Zelinsky talks about, as countries begin to develop, people are more likely to move to other countries and begin to migrate, as he talked about in that stage 2 of his model of migration transition. And if you look at, kind of at the very end, Latin America, as it begins to develop, because it's so close, it makes sense that the Latin Americans start moving to the United States. This idea that they're going to move from their country to a country that is of slightly better development. And so because of the proximity, even though a lot of the Latin Americans coming to the United States may not be very well off because the distance is not that great, they're able to make it in relatively short order. And then the other thing that we want to keep in mind are these periods of immigration pauses. And if you go back to the graph, or the graphic that I showed you from the Population Reference Bureau, you have these immigration pauses where not a whole lot of people were coming. And during the mid-19th century, during the mid-20th century, you had, the United States was involved in 3 wars, and then one of them was in the United States, 2 of them were overseas. But even still, war is just because of the war overseas in Europe, it's going to create a pause in movement of people. So obviously the Civil War conflict in the United States not necessarily encouraging people to come to the United States, and the United States would be mostly concerned about fighting within itself as opposed to worrying about immigrants coming to the United States. Plus, war does not necessarily make it, people don't necessarily want to go to a place where there is violent conflict. Then, of course, World War I and World War II are going to create substantial problems for people. Even if they want to come to the United States, it's going to be relatively tricky. So you see that last comment there. War and conflict create barriers to human movement. And so that's something important to keep in mind as we look at the different migration waves. So I hope you found that to be helpful. If you have any questions, leave those in the comment box below, and I hope to see you next time.